The story begins when a homeless man discovers a baby locked in a coin locker. Because of this, the baby was named Il-young, after the locker number she was found in. One day, a corrupt detective named Tak spotted Il-young at the station and abducted her. He took her to Chinatown, where a loan shark and organ trafficking business hides under the cover of a photo studio. The business is run by a woman referred to as Ma. Tak goes to her with Il-young and offers her as part payment for his loan, but when Ma looks at Il-young, she says he's brought trouble. From then on, Il-young worked with other kids her age distributing business stickers and begging for money. One night, Ma's goons drop the kids off at random points on the road, with Il-young being the last to get abandoned. However, the next day, Il-young is able to track down her friend Song, and they make it back to Ma's photo studio. When Ma sees Il-young's determination, she tells her men to get them food and takes them in. One night, Ma wakes Il-young up to work, but Il-young stops when she sees an injured dog. Ma quickly puts it out of its misery and warns Il-young that if she ever became useless, she'd be killed too. Il-young grows up and now works as a debt collector for Ma. She heads to a gambling rink where she threatens a man to win his game or his wife's organs will be trafficked. The man manages to win the game, but Il-young makes sure to teach him a lesson for being late. When Il-young returns home, she finds the rest of the family, including Song, Woo-gon, and Han-ju, who need his medication to function. That night, they all have dinner with Ma, who tells them about a debtor who left his son in Korea as insurance. When they suspect the man might try to escape, Ma tells Il-young to collect the payments from the son directly. Before she leaves, Woo-gon hands her a knife for protection and offers to go instead, but Il-young insists she can handle it. Later, she arrives at the son, Suk-yeon's apartment, and he invites her inside. He assures her she'll get the money, but insists she eats some food first. While she eats, Suk-yeon assures her his dad was working hard to get the money, but when Il-young suggests his dad might have abandoned him, he insists that it wasn't possible. After, Suk-yeon tries to treat a wound on her face which startles Il-young and causes her to storm out. When she leaves, Ma calls and asks about the visits, but Il-young claims Suk-yeon wasn't home. Ma then tells her to pick Song up as she's making trouble. Il-young quickly heads to a nightclub where she discovers Song has been using drugs. When they try to leave, one of Ma's former children, Shidu, taunts her. Il-young warns him never to sell Song drugs again, or she'll kill him, but Shidu warns her not to push it, or she'll get into trouble someday. The next day, Il-young goes back to Suk-yeon's apartment, but finds that he's not home. Just then, he calls her back and invites her to the restaurant where he works. When he gets off, Il-young asks for the money, but he invites her to a movie instead. Il-young then watches the movie with him and ends up sleeping on his shoulder. After the movie, they go out for drinks, and Il-young asks him what he finds so exciting about life. Suk-yeon says he didn't choose his life of poverty, but he might as well enjoy it. He then tells Il-young about his dream of going to a cooking school in France. Later, Il-young carries a drunk Suk-yeon back, and while he lies on the floor, he tells her it's not his fault for being poor. Meanwhile, Shidu goes to see Ma, who seems troubled. She tells him to leave as soon as he gets his money, so Shidu taunts her for getting old and mentions that Detective Tak was in serious debt from gambling. Later, Il-young notices Ma going out in the rain and rushes to hold up an umbrella for her. They head to a rooftop, where Ma pays her respects to her late mother. Il-young says her mom must have been good to her. Ma laughs as she reveals that she killed her mother at that very spot. She then asks for alone time and dismisses Il-young. Meanwhile, Woo-gon receives orders from Ma on the phone. He and Han-ju had taken out a group of debtors and were planning to sell their organs to repay the debt they owed. Just before Woo-gon finished one man off, he warned that the whole of Ma's family would be punished in hell. That night, Il-young got in bed with Song, who asked why she'd been acting strangely lately. However, Il-young refused to answer and simply told Song not to bother her. The next day, they went shopping and Il-young found a dress she liked. Song made her buy it and assured her she looked pretty in it. Afterwards, Il-young got her to take passport photos of her and wondered what she needed one for. Il-young asked if France was far away, but when Song started asking questions, she told her to forget it. Meanwhile, Woo-gon attacked Suk-yeon at his workplace and told him he had one day to repay his father's debt of $102 million. That night, Ma finds Il-young and tells her they have a job to do. She reveals that Suk-yeon's father abandoned him and insisted on taking his organs that night. Ma then tells Il-young she'll be the one to kill Suk-yeon and dispose of his remains after the surgery. Later, they arrive at the apartment building where Han-ju waits for Il-young. She then tells him to count to 100 before coming up and runs to warn Suk-yeon he's in danger. There, Suk-yeon refuses to leave his home when Han-ju shows up. Il-young warns him to stay back, but he insists he needs to obey Ma and charges at Suk-yeon, causing Il-young to hit him over the head. Once he's down, Il-young and Sukyeon run downstairs and try to escape, but Ma's goons ambush them and stop them from escaping. When Ma shows up, she hands Il-young a knife and asks her to prove she's not useless. Il-young begs for her mercy instead. Frustrated, Ma goes to Sukyeon and slits his throat right in front of Il-young. She then returns to Il-young and threatens to kill her, but Il-young calls out for her and passes out. Just then, Woo-gon shows up and begs Ma to reconsider since they're all family, but Ma reminds him that they're not. Later, Il-young wakes up in a container full of trafficked girls. When it opens up, she finds Chi-do, who separates her from the rest of the girls and receives instructions from Ma on what to do. When he hangs up, she beats her up and pulls a knife on her, so she grabs and cuts his eye as she holds him hostage. She then throws him in the water and makes a run for it while Chi-do's men chase after her. When they have her cornered, she jumps into the water to escape. Later, Chi-do calls Ma and threatens to kill Il-young when he finds her. Ma then informs the others that Il-young escaped and warns them not to do anything. Afterwards, attends to some guests who came to check on her when Chi-do said she was acting strangely. However, Ma tells them to remember their place, so they inform her Chi-do had sent Tak after Il-young. Meanwhile, Hongju tells Song he intends to kill Il-young, and when she tries to change his mind, he refuses. When the phone rings, Song picks up and tells the caller they have the wrong number, but it was actually Il-young. Later, Ma goes to see Chi-do, who demands payment for the eye he lost and the men Il-young killed. At this, Ma calculates how much he'll need for damages and comes up with a figure. When he agrees, she subtracts it from how much he owes her for raising him, helping his new business and disobeying her when she told him not to harm Il-young. When the number comes up in minus, Ma tells him to pay with his body, signaling the men to stab Chi-do continuously until he dies. Ma then puts the second-in-command in charge and asks for a drink. Meanwhile, Il-young goes to the spot where she hopes to meet with Song, but instead, she finds Hongju waiting for her. Hongju accuses her of trying to kill him and promises to kill her in return. He attacks Il-young, so she tries to fight him off, insisting she doesn't want to hurt him, but Hongju was off his meds and couldn't be reasoned with. Hongju gets the upper hand and is about to kill her with a bat when Woo-gon shows up to stop him. Woo-gon tells him to stop, but Hongju threatens to kill them all. He then stabs Woo-gon in the neck with a knife and rushes toward Il-young, but before he can reach her, Woo-gon snaps his neck and kills him. Woo-gon collapses, and when Il-young notices the knife in his neck, she says they need to go to a hospital. However, Woo-gon knows it's pointless and tells her he's scared to pull the knife out, but it hurts. At this, Il-young hugs him and cries as she pulls the knife out for him and he dies. As she cries, someone hits her over the head and she passes out. She then remembers a time when their family was peaceful and they had dinner together with Ma. She had set up a camera and taken a picture of them, and now she wishes she'd stayed. Later, she wakes up in the trunk of a car with her younger self who tells her she should have died. However, Il-young fights her thoughts and makes up her mind to survive. When the trunk opens, Il-young grabs Tak's gun and they both struggle for it. Tak ends up getting shot and collapses while Il-young grabs his phone and calls Ma. Il-young informs Ma that everyone is dead, and when Ma figures Il-young is planning to kill her next, she tells her she'd see her soon. Meanwhile, Song uses drugs again and has a meltdown at the club. She refuses to take any of Ma's calls and ends up slitting her own wrists. When Ma can't get a hold of her, she visits the coin locker where Il-young was found and leaves something there. Later, Ma returns home and Il-young finds her eating alone. When Ma notices her, she sits on the couch and asks Il-young what was so special about the boy. Il-young then says he was just nice, but now everyone is dead. Ma then tells her to kill her like she planned to do. Il-young hesitates, but Ma insists that once they decide to do something, they have to do it because that's their way. After hearing this, Il-young rushes forward and stabs Ma, who commends her for going through with it. She then hands her a key to a locker and tells her not to die. She leaves her business to her. Ma finally dies on the couch as Il-young mourns her death. Days later, Il-young takes over the business and continues running it with Chi-do's second-in-command. She then goes to visit the coin locker Ma had sent her to and found an envelope inside. There, she found a certificate of adoption giving Il-young Ma's last name and an ID with the picture she took in her dress. After this, Il-young returned to the couch where her mother died and lit candles to pay her respect just as Ma did.